Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the founder and CEO of Loyalty Brands and franchise legend, John Hewitt. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frank. It's my pleasure.
John, it is my pleasure to have you on the show. I never got a chance to meet you, but I was at that IFA convention back in 2005 when you won the Entrepreneur of the Year award. So it is my pleasure to have you on. I can't wait to talk franchising with you. I know there's a lot of emerging franchise founders that watch the podcast, listen to it, and be curious to get insights on really what it takes to build a couple of monster brands, such as yourself and you guys did with Jackson Hewitt and Liberty Tax Service.
That'll be great. And one thing that's interesting is most franchisors fail. To be in the top 50% of all franchisors in the United States, you only need 20 locations. So I think it's you're doing a great thing to try to help people break that barrier and become successful.
Thank you. I'm having a blast doing this. And truthfully, when I look back, when I founded my company, I thought back over those 20 years of what was the most fun, exciting time for me. It was that emerging period. And it might have been really scary, but it was also exhilarating. So I thought we can maybe glean some of that experience that we've had. And certainly, you've been around in franchising a lot longer than I have and created some, again, monster brands. And now you're the founder of Loyalty Brands. I believe you said you have 8 companies underneath that umbrella. So a lot to cover here. So John, I'm curious, then what do you think, why do so many franchisors fail if it only takes 20 to be successful in such a rare find?
Frank, what I've learned is, first I'll tell you the nitty gritty, and then I'll tell you the big picture.
Okay.
Because the big picture is so simple. But the nitty gritty is we've negotiated with about 30 or 40 brands to merge and help them. And what I've learned is that someone typically that starts a franchise organization has a successful mom and pop, and then their friends and they get the idea, let's expand this. Franchising is a great idea. And so they get into franchise. Well, there's a couple problems. One is they need the revenue to live on from the mom and pop. And so they need to keep working in the mom and pop. So they don't have full time to work at the franchise company. And secondly, they're not even good at it. It takes a different skill set to run a franchise brand rather than an all company owned brand. You need to treat franchisees different than you need to treat employees. And that's an art. It's not a science, it's an art. And so they don't have full time to do it. They're not good at it anyway. As a result, they just mutter along and they get interest and they get people excited, but the people all fall out because they don't really have a system. So that's kind of the nitty gritty. The big picture, though, is this, that what most franchisors don't learn is that there's one easy secret to founding a great franchise brand. And I'm the only person that's founded 2 of the top 100 franchise brands in the world. So the key thing is simply this: happy, successful franchisees. And most franchisors are built happy, successful franchisor. And so they do not understand this simple fact that if the franchisees prosper and they're happy, then you can't stop your growth. You're going to grow exponentially. But the minute that you start taking their profits and their joy out of the journey, you've lost. And so most franchisors fail simply because they do not understand this basic concept: happy, successful franchisees.
We always talk at the conferences about, unit economics. It's about profitability of the franchisees. There's nothing more important. What really goes side by side with that is that franchisees have to have hope, especially when they're starting out, because nobody's profitable when they're starting out, right? Where our job is to inspire them. They need to believe in the dream.
Yeah. Speaking of believing in the dream, the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid, people used to say, when I had a successful franchise, they said, yeah, that's because they drank the Kool-Aid. And I used to feel bad about that.
Right.
And then I realized that that's the only ones that are going to be massively successful is those that believe and those that follow the system as close as they can, 98, 99, 100%. The people that don't listen, that haven't drank the Kool-Aid, they're going to fail because that's what you get when you get a franchise system. When you get a great part of a great franchise system, you get a proven successful system. You got to copy that. If you don't buy into it, you're going to fail.
How long did it take you in your career to figure out whether you were picking the right franchisee or not? And what were some of the criteria that you figured out was like, they had to have this and, or you knew they were not the right ones?
Well, I have 6 children, 11 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren. And to me, franchisees are like children. And my job is to give them the best system in the industry. And I've been doing that for 54 years. Wherever I was, whether I was at H&R Block, they had the best system. When I was at Jackson Hewitt, they had the best system. At Liberty, they had the best system. And now Loyalty Brands and ATAX has the best system. So I'm going to give you the best system. Your job isn't, I don't really care how smart you are. I don't care how rich you are. I don't care how educated you are. I don't care how experienced you are. Your job is to pay attention to what I tell you. I've been doing this for 54 years. I fondly call myself the great grandfather of income tax. And you better pay attention, because if you come in thinking you're going to know better than John Hewitt about income tax, you're an idiot or stupid, right? You're never going to know as much as I do. Most of my people aren't 54 years old.
Right.
53 years ago, I was running 10 H&R Block offices, and 43 years ago, I was running 250. So I'm incredibly experienced. You got to pay attention. And so I learned, and here's the way I learned it. When we were thinking of growing Jackson Hewitt, my first independent brand, we started in Virginia Beach, and we said, we'll be really smart. We'll go geographic. We'll go to Richmond, and then DC, and then Baltimore, and then Philadelphia, and going south, we'll go to Raleigh, Durham, and Charlotte, and really smart strategically. And then people began approaching me from all over the country. And what I learned, Frank, is that I could put the only office I put in the state of Louisiana, in the middle of nowhere, way up north by Arkansas, Monroe, Louisiana. We put in 100 offices that year. Who's the number 1 office in the country?
Wow. So
it didn't matter geographic, it mattered the people. And it all came down to following the system. So in order to get people to follow the system, we changed. And in order for you to get a franchise, you had to come and spend a week with us at training. You didn't get your franchise until you spent that week with the group. Because if I saw at any point in the week that you weren't going to listen, if you raised your hand and said, I'm not going to do that, then we wouldn't let you have a franchise. Because when a franchisee fails, they can only blame 2 people, themselves or me. And they always blame me first. So I don't want to bother with that, right? I brought in 5,200 franchisees. The vast majority have been successful. Some haven't. The only difference between winning and losing is how much you follow the system.
What would you say to a franchisor that says, John, I love that idea, but gosh, if I train them for an entire week and then they don't sign the franchise agreement and compete with me, I just wasted my time and I brought a competitor on?
Well, first of all, if they don't sign the agreement and they're not going to listen, they're no competition. I've given people their money back in the past and said, you know what? I'm not even going to force you to honor your non-compete. You're no competition. People have said to me in the past, you're very free with your business knowledge and your business advice. Aren't you worried that your competitor is going to copy you? And I said, my own franchisees don't listen. I don't worry about my competitor listening. Out of the 5,200 franchisees I brought in, not one, zero, zippity-doo-dah, have listened to me 100%. No one listens. This isn't hard. It's very basic. We tell you that on February 2nd, it's going to be a busy day. So you need to adjust your hours. Instead of being open at 9 a.m., you need to open at 7 a.m. I mean, it's very clear-cut, objective, easy to understand. And 50% of our franchisees won't listen to that.
And that's, of course, a huge problem in franchising. Of course, if we have franchisees that don't listen, they're not going to accomplish their goals. It's going to, of course, reflect bad on us. Validation's going to suffer. They're going to suffer. It's just accumulation of a problem. How do you think a franchisor can better position themselves to get franchisees to listen?
The ideal thing, again, a long time ago, I learned that the franchisees believe each other more than me. So if I'm in a group, let's say I'm talking to two first-year franchisees, just completed their first year, and me, I will watch one of them ask the other one a question as if I wasn't there, as if I didn't know better than both of them combined, and that they'll ever know. They love, it's like children against parents, right?
Right.
Children bond against parents, adults. Children bond against adults. Franchisees bond against franchisors. So what we learned a long time ago is your biggest partners are your great franchisees. And so you ask your great franchisees to give testimonials. Now, it makes them feel better. It makes them feel recognized, and they believe themselves because they're spewing what they did. And so other franchisees buy in. If I can't get a franchisee to say part of our system works, then very few are going to listen. So I have to find the leaders, the best producers, and people they love the attention. We're going to have, look who we have here, right? John Smith, he's number one in the country. He's fastest growing. He doubled. And so you hype him up, and then he answers questions. And then all year long, they might call him for advice. So you herald your superstars to help you. And 95% of superstars, they love it. They love being held up. So we had groups, when we had 2,000 franchisees at Liberty, we had the Elite 18. We had a number of different categories of groups so when you came to convention, the Elite 18 they would all have a ribbon. And so there was about 3 or 4 master groups that we had our master franchises. And so they loved that. And it really told the story far better than I could, because even with my experience, they will not listen to me. Do you have children?
Yes, I have 2 kids, 25 and 22 years old.
They don't always listen, do they?
No, they don't.
Exactly. They wish they would have sometimes.
Right. What's your take, again, as being an emerging franchisor, on how early do I start a franchise advisory council and, using that to help, spread the goodwill and, hearing the voice of all the constituents?
Yeah, I'd say, I'm not sure the exact number of franchisees, but I would say this: the sooner the better. When I first started mine back at Jackson Hewitt, I was advised by others, some franchisors, you're just creating a renegade possibility. Well, I like to keep what the Godfather said, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I want to hear it. And most franchisors, because they don't believe in happy, successful franchisees, don't want to hear the advice from the franchisees. I crave that advice. And the easiest way to improve is when you're getting criticism. If no one ever criticizes you, how do you improve?
That's true.
And the beauty, one of the beauties of franchising is even when you're right, you're criticized. You can't do anything that everyone agrees to. I love telling this story that when I had 2,000 franchisees and I peaked at Jackson Hewitt, let's say I said to all of them, I'm going to give each of you $10,000. Well, you would think that they'd all be happy. But what have happened is, so you had some franchises that were paying $1 million worth of royalty, and some that were paying the minimum of $5,000, the minimum first year royalty of $5,000. So the guy that's paying millions says, well, if you're paying that guy that's only paying 5,000, 10,000, I should get 500,000.
Right.
And then the guy that's only paying 5,000, he's a loser, he's failing. He says that guy's making $2 million a year profit. He doesn't need the 10,000. Give me 30,000. You cannot make everyone happy. And my favorite Shakespeare is, to thine own self be true. So you have to always do what's right and always listen. I love the fact that I get criticism, because if both of us think alike, one of us is useless.
Right. True. I heard this great quote that criticism is the tax that you pay for being successful.
And in the United States, it's litigation is a tax you pay for being successful.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
I'm the one of the most criticized people on the planet. With 2,000 franchisees,
You have to have tough skin, right? You have to have thick skin.
you have to understand, you have to feel good about continuing to do the right thing.
Yeah. What's life like as a franchisor when you have 2,000 franchisees? I know, again, people don't listen, but aside from that, in making the machine really work.
It's good in so many ways because whenever I travel, and I travel even more now than I used to. I mean, even now that I've left Jackson Hewitt, left Block, left Liberty, whenever I travel in the country, I meet up with my former franchisees. And those 5,200 franchisees had hundreds of thousands of employees. So tomorrow when I go to Miami, I'll be meeting with ex-franchisees and potential franchisees and employees of those. It's just there's so much gratefulness in this country for what I've done. But the key to that growth, one part of it is that you have to learn, I call it the tip of the iceberg theory, that when something happens, right, then, for example, one time we got a complaint where franchisee got a call on April 15th. The TV station was coming to his office, and he was the worst franchise in the country. And he called up, and he couldn't get help quickly. So I realized that even though he was the worst franchisee in the country, he had a good point that we need to, in training, we need to talk about what happens when you're on an interview. We need to have part of the operating manual because in our business, in tax, every TV station, radio station, newspaper is going to write something about taxes during the tax season. I mean, you're bound to be called. So we should have a system set up to do that. Now, if someone had said, so we created a system for that, and it became part of our basic training, part of our advanced training, part of our, you could go find it in the operating manual of what to do. But if someone called up and said, oh, they're sending anthrax into our office, what do we do, right? You have to, you don't need a system for that, right? So you have to understand when you get a problem, you always have to think about that problem. Is that something that's going to occur hundreds of more times? Then we need to invent a system so that we can replicate that answer very easily. We can't do one-off. If we're getting 100 TV stations and radio and newspaper reporters that want to come to our offices, we don't want to have 100 different conversations. We want to have a system for doing that. So I call it my tip of the iceberg theory, that you have to watch for that as you grow your business. And your system needs to encompass all the things that might happen on a regular basis.
That makes total sense. And I'm sure you've taken all the years of all that experience and things that people wouldn't think about, like training my franchisees for media interviews. You have to integrate all of that. How, or I should say, when did you start Loyalty Brands? And I want to kind of get into how you created this, portfolio of companies.
Yeah. When I left Liberty, one of my largest franchisees said to me, or two of them, I had breakfast with them, and they invented the word loyalty. They said, you know what, we were having a civil war at Liberty, a problem year internally. And they said, you need to start a brand that called loyalty to people that are loyal to John Hewitt. And so I added brands to it because, I mean, when you think about it, brand loyalty is a huge thing, right?
Sure.
So I changed it to Loyalty Brands to take advantage of brand loyalty. But actually, many of the best ideas come from franchisees. Mm-hmm. So it was two of my franchisees at breakfast here in Virginia Beach invented the name Loyalty. Wow. I added the brands to it.
And what year was that you started Loyalty?
It was 2018.
Okay, so 2018. Would you mind sharing what your criteria was back in 2018 when you said, I'm going to create this portfolio of brands? What were you looking for?
What I thought is, I'm going to take emerging brands, and our first relationship with an emerging brand who have a good idea, but they're not growing rapidly enough. And I said, I can do, there are at least 50 or 60 organizations, mostly private equity around the country, that are developing groups of franchisors. And I said, I can bring something I can bring a couple things to the table that no one else can. None of these groups are providing mentoring for the franchisees. The reason we call it loyalty, I have one person been with me 53 years, three that have been with me 35, 30, 25, 25. I have an immense amount of experience in my organization. So we can mentor these CEOs and founders. Then I said, we can help them sell. I brought in 5,200 franchisees. Now, I'm sure someone else in the history of franchising must have done that. I've never met them, but almost no one's done that. And so I know how to bring in new franchisees. And in addition to that, out of my 5,200 franchisees and hundreds of thousands of employees, some of them are going to want to join us. They're going to want to join us as a franchisor or employee or customer. So whenever I go somewhere in the country, and then where are you located?
In Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, when I go to Tampa, I was just there a couple of months ago. I have ex-franchisees and ex-employees, and some of them are joining me. So I said, I can bring these things that no one else can. And so our umbrella of franchisors will be more powerful, faster growing than these other groups are.
What were you looking for specifically in the founders that you invested in?
Certainly, number one, they had to have integrity. Number two, they have to have a working model. And the model has to be replicable, right? And it can't be, and I'm very much against models that require advanced degrees. Like you got to be an attorney, or you got to be a dentist, or you got to be a doctor. When you think about all the franchisees I brought in, a lot of them are average. I mean, some don't have a high school, more than a high school education. Some got a GED. Half of them don't have college. And so you have to have a system that's replicable by kind of an above average, not average, but above average American. So it has to be replicable. And then finally, it has to be sticky, because as you get through the franchise journey, your franchisee kind of a love-hate relationship. They love the money they're making. They hate having to give you part of it. And so you have to have something that keeps them at the end of the day, so they don't all go out and compete with you, and then you have nothing. So it has to have all of those characteristics.
Cool. And in terms of these franchisors that would be under loyalty, was there a criteria on the number of locations that you wanted them to have before you would even consider them bringing them in?
No, most of the companies we partner with had less than 10 locations. So we really didn't care.
And what about their team? Team-wise, I imagine then they were very small, obviously, if they had less than 10.
Oh, yeah. They were typically virtually always just the founders.
At loyalty, I would imagine one of the benefits is centralized services, right?
Yep, exactly. So if you need HR or accounting or sales, we always provide the sales. We also, on request, will do the accounting, we'll do the legal work, the HR, all of those other things for a small fee.
Going back to your thoughts on, focusing on an actual emerging brand, John, what do you think it takes for a emerging brand to become an established brand and that they become royalty sufficient? And I don't mean just, obviously the franchise unit economics, but like internally, like what does it take to get past that emerging phase?
Yeah, it's, again, I said this earlier, that it comes down to understanding that you need happy, successful franchisees. And part of that is you need happy, successful employees. If you have happy, successful employees and happy, successful franchisees, you can't fail. So they have to have an understanding of that concept. I think the number one reason that I've been so successful, besides being blessed, of course, is that I always want what's best for the other person. And if what's best for them isn't best for me, they need to go somewhere else, God bless them. Life's too short. You go be all you can be. Go find somewhere else to be extraordinary. But when it's best for me and them, then that's incredible, joyful. But you have to do what's best for every person. And as long as you do that, you're not, and I preach to my sales staff, this isn't about selling anyone anything. Your job isn't to sell someone that they should do this. Your job is to find the right person. It's the right person, the right time, the right industry, and that's your job. If you find that person, it's the right time in their life, this is the right industry, they're meant to be self-employed, then I'll talk them into coming in and joining us. I'll figure out a strategy to get them in. Your job isn't to sell anyone anything, because if you sell the wrong people, then they're just going to fail, and it's going to take down your whole. It's toxic to your whole organization.
Wow. John, it sounds like you have so much fire in your belly still about franchising 55 years in. What drives you today? You've had all the success. What keeps you so motivated?
When I was a teenager, believe it or not, I was cocky. And even though I grew up poor, I knew I was going to be rich. I didn't know how I was going to be rich. I wish I would have been rich by being a New York Yankee baseball player, but I knew I was going to be rich. And I thought I'd just make a few million and retire. I'm a kid, right? I'll just make a few $1 million and retire and have the greatest life. And then I realized that no. The journey is the joy. The treasure at the end of the rainbow, when I sold 2 companies that were worth $500 million, and one became $1 billion company. These are 15 years and 12-year journeys, right? Mm-hmm. These are not if you wait to have your joy when you get that treasure, once in a lifetime treasure, that's crazy. The journey is the joy. And so, so I've enjoyed the journey, and the biggest accomplishment in my life is I've changed tens of thousands of people's lives. I've created over 1,000 millionaires and 5,000 people that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've changed people and made people happy and introduced people, and they got married and had children and so forth. I feel like I've had a great impact on the world and made it a better place.
You have. John, that's interesting. That's awesome. You and I have in common, my dream was also to be playing for the New York Yankees, but
oh, really?
Yeah, that dream wasn't going to come true.
Hopefully you had a better chance than I did.
I don't know about that. You said something, I wrote it down, I thought was interesting. You said, the journey is the joy. In any of your past businesses, did the journey end because the joy ended?
Well, no. As I said in the last one, when I left Liberty Tax, it ended in a civil war. So there was a year of civil war where we had a fight. It's interesting when you build a company and everyone's on board. You go to board meetings and it's unanimous. You're a public company. Unfortunately, both of my companies were public.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not going to make that mistake again. So a public battle is much more eviscerating and bloody. They used the public to make me look bad. So it was not joyful at the end, but I didn't leave because of the battle. It was just, I wasn't going to win the battle and be able to save the company. So I said, okay, well, you take it. And subsequently, they took the company bankrupt. So private equity ruined the company.
Yeah.
So that happens on occasion.
This is a great segue to talk about private equity. What are your thoughts on the impact that private equity is going to have on franchising, since we have this huge transition in the industry?
I'm not a big fan for this reason. I've done it in both of the first 2 times. I took at Liberty, we invested $129,000 in August of '82. And 15 years later, it was $483 million. So along the way, we took some private equity of about $3 million, which became they held it for 4 years and it became worth about $50 million. So the $3 million went to 50. What happens, Frank, is that they have about a 5-year window. So when they invest, you're both thinking long term. And then after the second year, they have a 4-year window. And I still have a 10-year window. And then the third year, they're down to a 3-year window, and I still have a 10-year window. Then they're down to a 1-year. We diverge on interest after a while because they want to be in and out typically on about 5 years. Now, some of them will tell you they hold it lifetime. They want it, they'll keep it 10 years. Some will say 3. But what I found is that my investors, who were venture capital funds and private equity, had a shorter time window. And it's not always best for the company to focus on the next quarter or the next year. And at the end, and that was what the civil war came down to when we were a public company at Liberty, is they wanted to have a great year. So lay off people, screw franchisees, cut everything. We'll cut down to the bone, have one good year, and then sell it. And then they'll be fine. But meantime, I'm the CEO, and I love my franchisees like children and my employees like children. So they have different time frames. It's tough to align that.
Clearly, if we both think that our timeline is long term, and we quickly discover that long term to you and I may be quite different than long term to private equity, there's going to be a problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, you're not the first person that I've heard from that has shared their thoughts that some of the decisions, and this is really great for an emerging founder that's listening to this, to realize that, look, there could be great reasons why you align with private equity, but other times is that you may be running it differently, in that you may be living on a more quarter to quarter basis on your decision making versus what you and I were familiar with, is that we look on, we budget for the year, we have forecasts, and we're not necessarily cutting out a whole bunch of people or cutting absolutely critical aspects of our business because we missed our forecast. Business still goes on. We don't live based on the latest numbers. It's a different way of existing.
Exactly. And often they align, but sometimes they don't.
And it's hard, I would imagine, for a founder. You get wooed by a private equity. You hear everything you want to hear, but you don't know until you're in the relationship that decisions like that are really going to happen, right?
Exactly. I've virtually always been disappointed.
Yeah. So anyway, I think this is a great caution to founders, not saying don't get involved in working with a private equity firm, but there are other opportunities to become part of a portfolio brand. And I think, what you're doing obviously with loyalty is definitely different. You're bringing meaningful value back to your founders with providing centralized services based on your experience. And in some private equity cases, that's why I think it's really important for founders to do their due diligence to making sure that if they're going to have centralized services, that there are folks with franchise experience, not just people that are saying, hey, I'm going to throw money at you and, that's it. Don't you find it to be a big difference across the private equity firms that are involved with emerging brands, is that the real value of what they're providing, it can differ greatly?
I think that's true in any industry.
Yeah.
You're always going to get it's the 80-20 rule. And sort of with my franchisees, I have 10 or 20% are fantastic and 10 or 20% have been horrible. And the rest are in the middle. I would say that's probably the same with virtually every industry.
Sure.
Right? Including private equity.
Yeah. Yeah. What trends are you seeing now, John, in franchising in terms of franchise concepts?
Well, I think that there's too many. Most fail. If you look at the members of the International Franchise Association, there's 4,000 franchisors, and to be in the top 50%, all you need is 20 locations. That's horrible failure. So I think that there's too many concepts. But one trend I can say over the last 10 or 15 years, I'm seeing a lot more parents, well-to-do parents, acquiring franchisees for their children. So especially their children that are either college age or just out of college. So I think that's changed over the last 10 or 15 years. When I started franchising back in the 60s or 70s, the average franchise was about 50. And then it went down to about 45. And then it went down to about 40. And now it's coming a little bit. The average franchisee is even younger, but it's because they have parents who have been well-to-do and made a living and are seeing that college isn't for everyone and having a job isn't for everyone. So I think that the move to self-employment is trendy.
I had limited success personally with parents that bought or grandparents that bought franchises for their kid or their grandkid. I would say it was probably, I'd say less than 50-50 for sure, that it worked out really well. How about yourself?
I think that it's because we're so intent on getting people to follow the system. Mm-hmm. And because we're so nurturing and requiring people, young are better at going and immersing themselves. So if I find that someone wants to bring in a kid that I don't think is going to do it, I require them to go and work with one of my top franchisees for a month or 2 months or 3 months. I don't just let any Joe Schmo come in and do it. Mm-hmm. So I don't think because of that, and they're much more able to do that. I've even had over the years, I had a couple that stayed with my house. And I had a beach house with 8-bedroom beach house that I lived in by myself. And occasionally I would have an intern come in and stay with me. We required them to go learn from existing franchisees.
Mm-hmm.
And that was proof was in the pudding. If they wouldn't do it, they couldn't get a franchise. And if they fell out in the process saying, oh no, this isn't for me, then that was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're more careful in that case. And as you can imagine, a 20-year-old or a 23-year-old can go do a 3-month sabbatical more than a 40 or 50-year-old because they don't have any high income requirements and their parents are footing the bill anyway. So we gave them a little bit more attention. And I think our success rate was very comparable to other situations.
Okay, that's great advice for sure. We did have a few franchisees who took in some of the kids of the parents to work as program directors and stuff, which definitely helped. But as I think through some of my stories, there was definitely more stories than not that was not an option. But I think that is a great idea for emerging franchisors to do, because it does open up the opportunity for you to expand much greater if you can really take on folks that are younger, inexperienced, and their parents are willing to invest in them.
Yep.
Yeah, it can help. How does a franchise brand that's emerging even compete and, try to get ahead of this competition in such a, 4,000 franchisors that are out there? How are they able to compete for the same number of virtually prospective franchisees that are out there?
In each industry, there's X amount of franchisees. And you're right, every brand has to have a differentiator. David had gone onto the field with the same sword and armor and shield as Goliath. There would be no David and Goliath story. He'd be the 187th guy killed by Goliath. So you have to have differentiators. So our system is better than anyone's system. We developed the best system in the industry. And after all, it comes down to, it doesn't matter nationally. It matters in the local market. In most of our brands, customers travel less than 20 minutes or 25 minutes from where they live to our location. So we have to beat them in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So we do some things that no one else does. And I go to my franchisees and say, I have this conversation that, let's say in your area, there are 3,000 businesses and there are 10 competitors, right? And think about how they're all marketed. They're all online. Some of them are on TV, some of them on radio, some of them are newspaper. Everyone's digital, pay per click. I mean, everyone's doing the same thing. So what are you going to do different that they're not doing? And so we have some things that we recommend that no one else does. For example, I don't know if, I'm sure in Tampa over the years, you must have seen our Liberty Waiver, our Liberty Dancer. Now, in Tampa, guess how many companies have a waiver of any kind out in front of their location? And in Tampa, there are 50,000 small businesses, right? There's 33 million small businesses in this country, about 1 for every 10 people. Mm-hmm. So if the population is 500,000, there's 50,000 businesses. That includes at-home businesses. So they're all doing the same thing. If pretend that there's only 50,000 businesses in the Tampa area, and you got one company with a costume character out there, does that set you apart? That's a differentiator.
Absolutely.
And so that's one. I'm not going to give you all my tips of what we do different, but we do some things clearly in each of our industries that no one else does. We make sure that they have a differentiator that is objective, not subjective. Mm-hmm. Everyone says they offer the best service. If you called H&R Block CEO, who would he say offer the best service? Or Jackson Hewitt or Liberty? Right. They'd say we offer the best service, but we can prove it. So, for example, during the 4 busiest weeks of the year in tax, most people think of it as a 3.5-month business, but it's really a 4-week business where we do 60% of our business. Wow. So if you're going to do 1,000 tax returns in the year, you're going to do 600 in 4 weeks. So we expand our hours. We expand our hours. And I love driving by an H&R Block office at 9 a.m. and seeing customers standing outside and preparers sitting inside playing on their computer because they're like a bank and they open at 9 a.m. So it's those things that are clearly, objectively differentiators that make us grab market share. And we pride ourselves in the lowest cost in every industry, the lowest cost of customer acquisition because of the things we do different. We're not one of those 50,000 businesses. We do a few things different than every other industry, not just those in our own industry.
John, that is great advice for an emerging founder to hear, for sure. If I was a founder of an emerging franchise and let's say I only had 5 people part of my company, we're still grinding. What's the first leadership position that you would hire?
That's easy. You need to look in the mirror and see what your skills are and find someone who has different skills. That's simple, but it's different for each person. You strike me as a personality. You don't strike me as an accountant. So you're going to hire an accountant, right?
Right.
If you're an accountant and a typical accountant with no personality, you're going to hire someone with personality. So what you have to do, first of all, is analyze your own skill set, figure out all the skills you need and hire people with different skills. And for sure, so it has to have different skills and it has to be someone that is got the guts to disagree with you. Again, if you and I think the same, one of us is useless. And so you need to find someone who doesn't agree with you.
I love that. I preach and have preached on this podcast, but hiring for your weakness. That's essentially what I preached. And quite honestly was a secret sauce, to my success was definitely getting out of my own way and looking in the mirror and saying, okay, here are the things either I'm not good at or I don't want to do, and hiring for that. So thank you. I'm glad to really hear that. And I know people hopefully will take to that advice. What's been your biggest surprise in franchising? I hate to say it over so many decades, but maybe more recently, if not.
I don't think I have any big surprises recently. I've been doing it for 54 years.
Okay.
Right. So, but my initial biggest surprise was a couple things. Number one is no one listens. But I started in franchising before I had children. As soon as I had children, I understood that. And of course, I was a child and I was the most rebellious child. I should have gotten that. And what I didn't understand is that it's such a competitive advantage. In this country, you can only hire 2 or 3% of people that act like owners. The other 95, 96, 97% act like employees. In every franchise system, the franchisees do a better job than the company employees because they act like owners. 95% of my owners act like owners. Less than 5% of my employees act like owners. And so the huge thing about franchising is that I get owners. And in addition to that, Frank, and no one talks about this but me. And I think they don't talk about this because they feel guilty. But when you're a franchisor, you get very talented people to pay you to work for you. So when I bring in a new franchisee, I'm averaging bringing in people that make 6 figures and they work for nothing and they pay me to work for me for nothing. I mean, what a concept that is.
That's the beauty of franchising.
But you have to do what's best for them and provide them a great system and respect them and continue to improve. You can't have the best system without it be improving. You have to commit to improvement. But what a dream come true. Very high quality people pay me to work for me.
Right. Yeah,
That's
for me, that was one of the most motivating factors to franchise the concept was I didn't have a whole lot of capital starting out. And I thought, not only can I, expand quicker, but people who I would have never been able to afford as employees were far greater skill with, various backgrounds as franchisees. That was like my biggest takeaway when I got into it. I didn't realize it going in, but it occurred to me really quick as I got involved in franchising. It's like, wow, these are really quality people that I just couldn't afford. And then
certainly not as an emerging brand.
No, definitely not.
Maybe when you get to be a $100 million, $200 million, $500 million company, you can afford expensive employees.
Sure.
You can't afford when you have 0 franchises or 5 or 10. You can't pay people hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. Oh yeah.
You go bankrupt pretty quick.
Right. I meant to ask you before when we were talking earlier about expanding. What is your opinion on growing company-owned locations versus franchise locations? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah. If you read my book, iCompete, I say the second biggest mistake I made when I started Jackson Hewitt back in 1982. I acquired 6 offices from Mel Jackson's widow, my software company, and we merged Mel Jackson, changed the name to Jackson Hewitt, went public. And we bought 6 offices. First Texas, and we had 11. Second, we had 15. And third, we had 22. So we had went from 6 to 11 to 15 to 22 in 2.5 years. And that's pretty good growth, except for H&R Block had 9,000, 9,000, 9,000, 9,000. And our goal was to be number one, to have our fanatic, crazy, big, hairy, audacious goal was to have 9,000. And I realized that this pace, I was going to be about 5,000 years old before we got to 9,000. So we immediately switched to franchising. And so when I started both Liberty Tax and Loyalty Brands, first day we started franchising. Because the minute we started franchising, we began to grow exponentially. And again, Jackson Hewitt has 6,000 offices. Liberty has 4,000 offices. Combined, they have more offices. H&R Block still, 41 years later, has 9,000 offices. And Liberty and Jackson Hewitt grew to 10,000 offices. So I beat them combined, just not either company.
Still, that's incredibly impressive. Do you have an opinion on whether a franchisor emerging should have company-owned locations, and should it be part of their growth strategy, or do they go all in on franchising and have, initial company-owned locations for cash flow? What are your thoughts?
I've listened to a lot of smart people or people that think they're smart and say, you know what, we need to show them. We need to have company locations to test things and show them. And each and every time I've watched them flounder because the franchisees outworked them, out-hustled them, and did it better. They tested things better. They built better. So on average, the franchisees are going to kick the butt every time of a company location. And I've seen that others that only have a few dozen franchises haven't seen that. Remember, I built 2 10,000 unit chains. And in those 10,000 unit chains, even today, they still have maybe 1,000 corporate locations. And the 9,000 franchisees kicked the butt out of those locations. At H&R Block, they have 9,000 locations and 75% of them are corporate. They've been public since 1961. So for 62 years, only 2 years did the corporate perform better than the franchises in growth. 59 out of the 61 years, the franchisees grew more than the corporate. It depends. If you want to grab market share and offer the best service, then owners, franchisees are the key way to do that. I'm not a fan of company location.
Cool. Okay. So John, I always finish with the tip jar because the franchise community is so generous, and you have been extremely generous with all this info here on the show. So I'm going to ask you, if I was a entrepreneur that was looking to franchise my concept, can you give me one tip on what I should do if I aspire to franchise?
Well, remember, you have to meet that criteria. You have to have integrity, a working model. It has to be replicable. And it has to be sticky. Those are the keys to having a model that works. And you have to understand, when normally 95% of the time, if you can run a mom and pop business, you cannot be an owner of a franchise system. You're going to have to hire a CEO who can do it for you.
Amen to that. I love that. I agree with you 100%. Hey, John, if someone was interested in working with you or learning more about Loyalty Brands, maybe being part of your company under the umbrella, how can they get more info?
You can find me on Wikipedia, or you can email me at john@loyaltybrands.com. I'm easy to find.
Yes, sir. And lastly, I want to share with everybody, if John is the best-selling author of iCompete, How My Extraordinary Strategy for Winning Can Be Yours. Wrote that book in 2016. I'm sure it's available on Amazon.
It is. And if you send me an email, I'll send it to you for free. And we're halfway done with my second book.
Awesome. When's that coming out?
It'll be another 18 months.
All right. We'll be looking out for it. John, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure to talk with you. I respect, how much you've been able to build in franchising over the course of your career. And I enjoyed our time together. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.